Bruchim Habaim, welcome all. My name is Elaine Todres, and I want to welcome you on behalf of my co-chair, Jerry Kirschbaum, the most wonderful partner you could ever imagine, who's in Maine responsible for this program because he had a meeting with Nathan where they leapt into a long discussion in Yiddish, Jerry being the child of Holocaust survivors, and of course Nathan needing no introduction. And all I can say is that Jerry was captivated with Nate. And anyone who's met Nate knows that you become captivated by him, as all of you will become captivated by him this afternoon. So thank you, Jerry. Thank you for all your hard work. And thank you to the work of the Yiddish Committee. You'll have an advertising plug at the end where we'll ask you to come to many more events that we've planned. We in this room, some of us are Holocaust survivors. Some of us, like me, are descendants of Holocaust survivors. Some of you have no direct linkage with the Holocaust. But what we share in common is a desire to know, to acknowledge, to share, to learn about the tragedy that befell the Jewish people. Nate, a fellow Torontonian, has a very unique story to tell, not only for himself, but for his late father. He not only speaks for them and his family, but he speaks for all survivors. His articulate voice of unwavering truthfulness about what happened is mingled with a glowing sense of purpose and optimism that he infuses to all his audiences, young and old, civic and governmental. This unique quality is particularly significant, if not sacred, at a time of rising anti-Semitism in North America, and indeed the world. At a point in time where our children and grandchildren and possibly great-grandchildren are facing prejudice and hatred in a manner that none of us would ever, ever, ever have contemplated.
Hi. With such introduction, how can I fail? You know, I mean, I can go home now, and I had a successful afternoon. But you know, we live in a very difficult time, as Elaine has pointed out. That our youth is in trouble. They're in trouble because they're being attacked. And you know, in 1922 in Germany, the Jews were very secure. They were in the sciences, they were in the university, they were professors, they were doctors, they were philosophers, and musicians, and they had the world. And the most important thing is they were citizens of Germany, and they felt that Germany was their Vaterland, their father's land. We talk about, in Yiddish, we talk about motherland, but in German, talk about Vaterland. That's a different situation. And they felt very, very safe. And then, you know, economic situation changed, and they ran. They ran the only thing they could do, and for 2,000 years, that's what Jews did. Is that Tsar was over here, and the Jews were beaten up. They picked up their bundle, and we know from Fiddler on the Roof, what they did is they ran. Well, my dear friends, our running is over. Our running stopped in 1948, when it was the creation of the State of Israel. And today, Israel is not running. The Israelis are not running. Jews are not running anymore. They're fighting. And you know, Jews in America today, which we find ourselves, they are in an economic situation the same way as the Germans were in 1922. But we are much more secure here because of the American Constitution, because of our history in America. But the most important thing is, we're not going to run. We are not going to run. We were going to be here, and we're going to fight anti-Semitism right here. not from over there, right here. And we have to teach our youngsters, we have to teach our students to be strong and proud of their heritage, 2,000 years of heritage or more. They have to stand up and fight for our rights, because our rights are the same as anybody else's right. We as Jews have to have the right to live anywhere in the world, just as any other people. Just as Israel as a country can live among other nations and be proud and productive, that's the way we have to do. So we don't have anymore the choice of running. We're not going to run. And anyone who is attacking us, if they don't understand that, we have to teach them that that's what situation that we find ourselves. Then my fellow Yiddish-speaking fellows, you know, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm happy to be here on the 77th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the death camp of Auschwitz, in which 1 million of our Jewish-speaking, Yiddish-speaking people were murdered. So it's very fitting that I should, on this day, 77 years later, only 5 days away from the actual date, be here and speaking to you about what happened. When I talked about my family, they're not an image somewhere in the ether. They're with me. They're sitting in front of me. I'm thinking about them, looking in their eyes. So how did it all start? War broke out in 1939. The first thing that the Nazis did is they attacked Poland. I was 11 years old, running on the street without a kids, without a worry. Suddenly, there's rumors that the war is starting. My parents are shipping us off to another city to lodge. We're living in Chorzów, which is near Katowice, which is in Silesia, southwestern part of Poland, and they're sending us up to the middle of Poland, where, you know, they figured the war is going to take a while before they get there. Well, of course, they were wrong. The Germany overran our area within 3 days and lodged within a week, and the entire country in 3 weeks, 21 days. And there was no more Poland. There was no Polish government in Poland. The Nazis considered Poland as being just slightly higher than the Jews, and they were going to enslave them, so that they did not create a Polish government as they did in all other occupied countries, but except for Poland. So here we are, 11 years old, they're marching, and our trouble starts. The first thing they did is they made our hometown Judenrein. What does that mean? It means free of Jews. And that's a very important concept, because they told us, they sent us a letter. They told my father's store was confiscated. And they said, you got 1 week to get out of this here. And what do you take? You have what you can take in a wagon. And my grandfather, by the time we were deported from our hometown, the first thing they did is they took my father, all the able men in our hometown between the ages of 17 or 18 and 45, and they packed them off and they sent them out, and we didn't know what happened. They said they're going to somewhere east to work. We didn't know what happened. So my mother's father packed up our house and his house, and we put whatever we could on a wagon, and we went to Sosnowiec. Sosnowiec was a Jewish town. 1/3 of the people in Sosnowiec were Jews. So there was a certain comfort. And my father was shipped to the Soviet border. He escaped, he came back. He came back to join our family in 1940. And then they created a Judenrat, which you know what that is. That's a committee of Jews looking after the Jews, which some today consider as being collaborators. And we did lots of discussion about that, whether they were or not. In fact, there were collaborators, but without the being collaborators, the situation for the Jews would have been worse than it was. In the meantime, at the age of 12, I studied how to become an electrician. I become an electrician's apprentice, and I'm working in a factory. The world of my world is still not as dark as it was in Warsaw Ghetto. We're living in an open ghetto, which is not the same as Krakow or Warsaw, which were closed ghettos. Our conditions were livable. There were not enough food because everybody had food rations. People did not have money, but the Jewish community got together and they had soup kitchens and they supported people. And those families who were shipped, whose parents, whose male member was shipped to either a son or father was shipped to Germany, they were supported by the Jewish community. And I worked as an electrician, and we then were shipped from one. Our living conditions were, we're talking about living today in our palatial homes. We lived in half a room, because the other half a room was lived by another family, separated by a curtain. But we were together. We were together as a family. I don't know how my mother made a meal out of whatever we had. There was so little food, but yet she could prepare a meal. And as long as we were together, we had hope of somehow surviving this war. In 1941, it feels like the war is never going to end, or the situation's not going to change, because Nazis were going from one country to the other, occupying one country after the other. There was Belgium and France and Denmark and Holland and they were the rulers of the world. And our situation was dire, was very, very, very difficult. But they put us into a ghetto and we worked for them, but that was not enough. August the 1st, 1943, became the terrible day where they came and they entered our building. They demolished the walls and doors in order to get everybody out. My mother and my father, my sister and I were together. We were marched from our ghetto to another ghetto. And the Polish people, women were standing there and crying. Other kids or other people were jeering, saying, "Press Żydami, away with the Jews." The anti-Semitism was there. It was, wherever there is a dictatorship or an extreme right wing, the people who are so inclined come out of the woodwork. And so the anti-Semitism during the war in Poland was just as it was all over the world, including the United States, I must say. Also, we forget about that period. And they walked us from one ghetto to the other to a railroad station, and you can imagine the scene. Men, women, and children walking with a little bundle what they could take, and the children holding their parents' hand, and they're getting separated, and there's a rush, and the children are not, you can't find the child, and the mother is crying and screaming and yelling and looking for the child, and the children are looking for their parents. But only one word that I could describe it is, it's bedlam, chaos. And we marched to a station, and there now we are sitting on the station, on the ground, on the concrete floors, on the front concrete ground of the railroad station. And the children, this is now about 10 hours later since they took us out of our hiding place. And the children are saying, "Mommy, I want to go to bed." Mommy, I'm hungry. Mommy, I'm thirsty. And you know the feeling that these people had when they heard the voices of their children crying and being unable to give them a drink of water. That, my friends, is not described in any of the journals or any of the writings that you hear about the Holocaust. You only hear about the murder. But the pathos, the difficulty of the people that they were experiencing before they met their death was horrendous. And that's what I remember. I remember those horrible moments when I witnessed these young children pleading for a drink of water and the mother not being able to give them it. And we were standing there, we were there overnight. It became dark. It was in the middle of the summer. It was warm. And the darkness came upon us, and so did the quietness. And everybody fell asleep. And then about 5 o'clock in the morning, with the rise of the sun, suddenly a train pulls into the station and Bedlam starts again. And during the night, people get separated, people go to the washroom and they don't come back. And the trains, and everybody's trying to get onto the train. And if you look at the pictures of the people entering the cattle car, you see it's an unusual situation. They're fighting to get into the car. Why are they fighting to get into the car? They want to get in together with their family. One member is on the train, and they're standing down on the platform, and they don't want to get separated. So they fight with the others to be with their family members. So families are trying to stay together. You know, 4 or 5, by this time, most of the members have lost people who were sent to the labor camps or deported before that. But now we are here together, and this is our last chance to be together. And we fight to get together onto the car. And we get on the car, and we're sitting on the car with my mother, my sister, and my father, and my mother, and the 4 of us huddled together. The last few words, my mother says, "We'll meet after war," and my mother's neighbors, who was a Christian woman. And my father gives us a 5 zloty that he had, and I put it in my hand, and that's all I have, because we were taken out of a hiding place and we were not allowed to take anything with us. So we just had what we were wearing. It was a summer, like today. And we get on the train, and we travel for a number of hours, and we jostled against each other. Families are trying to talk to each other. And finally the train arrives somewhere, and the door opened up with a clank, and everybody, and the dogs on the ground, and there's men in striped uniform, and everybody's shouting, "Everybody out, everybody out." And again Bedlam starts. Again the children want to stay together with the parents, and there's an order, the men on this side and women on that side. And nobody moves. So then they started pulling people apart. And that's the last time I saw my mother. I was standing with my mother and my sister, and my father came over to me, he yanked me by my sleeve and says, "You come with me. You are considered a man." I was 15. I looked like 12. And we end up standing in the first row of a column of men, and my mother and my sister, first row, first 5 people in the row of women. And you know, suddenly things happens very quickly. There's a guy in front of us, and he does this. And he says this to my father, and he goes over there, and he tells him something, and to me, he doesn't even look at me, and he's just over there. And I find myself again in another column of men, with this time with younger boys my age, 14, 15 years old. And I'm trying to figure out what's happening. And I see my father is with the young people, and my mother and my sister are with the young people as well. So I figure they'll go to Germany to work, and I will stay here, wherever here is. We didn't know. And I'm not worried anymore. They told us they're going to resettle us. They're going to give us better lodging. They'll give us better food. They're going to give us jobs. And we're going to be happy. So I said, okay, I'm 15 years old. I have a trade. I can look after myself. My father is in one camp. My mother and sister are going to be in another. And I'll stay wherever he is. And while I'm having all these thoughts, suddenly I hear a voice shouting on my name. Natek, Natek. I suddenly wake up to the call, and I see my father standing there with a Nazi officer, and my father says to the Nazi officer, he's 17 years old, and he's an electrician. So I got the idea that he knew that I knew that he wanted me to tell 17, that I was 17. And Nazi spoke to me for 5 seconds. And after I satisfied his question, he says to my father, he says, okay, take him. And then we got a lecture. And this is the lecture. He says, the people that you left on the railroad station, at the railroad siding, are now being processed. What does processed mean? Processed means that they're being gassed to death. Now, how does a human being understand that his family is being gassed now to death? What crime have they committed other than being born Jewish? What possible emotion can you feel when you hear these words that your families are being murdered? The column that I was standing in, that my father managed to get me out of, were being gassed to death. I'm alive because this Nazi officer decided to let me go. And we were inside this camp, which was called the Durchgangslager, or transition camp. And every week, there was a selection. And when they gave me clothes, you know, they didn't expect a 12-year-old kid, so nothing fitted. My clothes were too large, my pants came up to here, and I looked like a scarecrow with my sleeves and pants rolled up. So I knew that if the selection committee comes into the camp and they're looking for people who are not fit for work, for sure they're going to take me and they're going to gas me. So now, from now on, the fear of death is there day and night. And you're living with that. Every week, we hid. When they came to one barrack, we ran to another barrack. And when they finished this one, and they took one over, went again over for the selection of the next barrack, we ran behind the barracks and we joined another barrack. And like that, we lived for 12 weeks. And, you know, the transports from the outside were coming. And we were sitting there and we were praying to God that said, what's happening? How come there isn't a miracle to stop this? These women and children were marching past our camp to their death in the gas chambers. And the world was silent. And I asked my father, how is this that is happening? And he said, the world doesn't know what's happening. And you know something? He was wrong. Because in 1943, the world did know. And you know what they decided to do? Nothing. That's our world, the way it behaves. And that, my dear friends, is a message to you that if you think Israel can depend on anybody else except itself, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. So that's what happened when I was in camp and I saw daily people marching past. Finally, a transport was coming, a selection committee was coming for a transport, and they were looking for healthy people. And so we lined up to get out of Auschwitz, because our days were numbered now. And, you know, we getting close to the 4 months that they promised us that we were not going to survive longer. And we lined up. My father was, of course, accepted, and I was rejected because they examined us in the nude. And there's a little skinny kid, you know, was standing in front of the doctor, and he just threw me off. And my father gets dressed, and he looks to see where I am. I'm looking to see where my father is. We see each other from the distance. He's kept together with the other people who were selected to go out. And the couple is there, and my father, and I see my father is talking to the couple, and he's arguing with the couple, and he's trying to push them away. And I'm dumbfounded by what's happening. And so is the Nazi who was overseeing this election. And he says to the couple, he says, "What's happening?" And the couple says, "This idiot wants to talk to you. This is God that he wants to talk to. He can decide who can live and who can die. He can shoot you out the second." And that's what used to happen. That if you protested for what the Nazis were doing, the first thing they do is take out the gun and shoot you. But my father went ahead and he stood in front of this guy. He addressed him by his rank. And he said, "My son is here and I would like him to be with me." And the guy got mad. So it could have just taken the gun and shot him. But he says, "You know something? There's a war. I'm here. My wife is in Berlin. And my son is on the East Front." And he stopped. And he thought. And after a few seconds, something happened in his mind. And he said, "Where is he?" And my father motioned to me, and I jumped up in front of him and I stretched myself out. By that time I had proper clothing. And I clicked my heels and I spoke to him in perfect German, and which he was surprised. And then he said, "Okay, wait here." And he told me to stand while the selection was still going on. And I'm sure it wasn't more than 15, maybe half an hour. To me, it was an eternity. And I was berating myself. I said, we should not have volunteers to come on this selection because now we're going to be separated. If I'm here by myself in Auschwitz and my father is not with me to protect me or to look after me, I'm going to be lost. And a few minutes went by. It felt like eternity. And finally, he said, "Come here, give your number to the doctor." I gave my number to them. I was a 601 person on a 600-man transport. They took 49 more to see if somebody got sick, to place the ones that were selected. For 2 weeks we were in quarantine. They marched us. We had to run, we had to jump, we had to squat, we had to do frog jumping, we had to do push-ups to see who was fit. And after the first 2 days, the 600 men were like a military column. They were sharp. Everybody knew that this was their life. This was life to get out of Auschwitz. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, we were put on a train and shipped to Krupp factory near Breslau, where they were manufacturing the big Bertha guns for the ships. And I worked as an electrician. My father worked as a mechanic. And we were there for 15 long months. The war was going on. Food was scarce. But we managed. If you read my book, you'll see there were many things that happened. And then, of course, came the end. The war, the Nazis were losing the war. The Soviets were approaching Auschwitz, and they were already liberated Auschwitz, and they were coming towards Germany, and they decided to take us on a death march, or from one camp to the other. We had to go to our mother camp, which by this time was Großrosen, 140 kilometers. Not very much, not very long. But we were mostly exhausted. Our bodies were depleted, and it was in the middle of winter. It was January. Many men fell, or they couldn't hold up, couldn't keep up, and the Nazis, they just went ahead and shot the men at the end of the column. And we just kept rushing inside the column. We would fall back, and then when we got closer to the end, we suddenly, energy, untold energy was just moving up forward, or not to become to the end, not to be shot by the cleanup commando. And that's, we went from one camp to the other. We went like this from Auschwitz to Gross-Rosen. From Gross-Rosen we went to Flossenburg, a mountainous camp in the mountains, stone quarry, terrible death toll. And we managed to stay together. Then from there we went to Lowenberg, an armament factory inside a mountain. And then typhus broke out. And I became deathly ill with typhus. And I had to, they shipped us to another camp. They told us they were going to send us to another camp. Except, I think it was the Buchenwald, but they sent us to Dachau. When we got to Munich, they couldn't take us anymore at Dachau. Dachau was a relatively small camp. It only had about 20,000 prisoners. You know, Auschwitz was a huge camp. Had 100,000 people in Auschwitz. So in Dachau was a small camp. They couldn't take us, so they sent us to a sub-camp in Mihldorf on Inn. And there, finally, I worked. I was lucky. I worked in the kitchen. But that only lasted a few days. And then they shipped us to another camp, the 7th camp, in a forest. And there I lost all my body muscles, and I was obviously exposed to typhus fever, and I was almost dying. And I said to my father, "You go, I'll stay in camp. I'm not going. Whatever they're going to do, they're going to shoot us in the camp. They're going to shoot me on the way. I'm not going to make it today. I'm not going to make it. I don't want to die on the road." And he said, he got mad at me. He says, "You're not giving up now. You're coming with me." So we marched to the gate. And there at the gate, the commandant was standing, and I ran up to the commandant and I said to him, or I hobbled actually, and I said to him, I'm sorry, sir, I can't go. I will not make the destination. They're going to shoot me on the way." He took a look at me and he says, "Okay, you can stay." He told me to go to the infirmary. But I said, "My father, he's with me. Don't separate us." And he got mad. He says, "No, he's got to go. Let him go." So after a few minutes, my father picked me, put his arm underneath my arm, and we sort of moved away. When the Nazi changed his mind, and he said, "You can stay, both," with a smirk on his face. We didn't know what that meant. But at any rate, we were happy that we were together, and we stayed in the camp, and 5 days later we were liberated by the American army. So now there is this. You're liberated. Your mind can't accept what you just heard. You're free. We survived. We hugged and we danced and we laughed and we cried. We cried because we realized at that moment we did not have, up to that moment, we did not have time or the energy to think about anybody else except ourselves. Our struggle was to survive the day, the hour. Now that we were free, we had to think about what happened to our families. Who survived? Did my mother survive? Did my sister survive? Did my grandparents survive? We knew the answer, but we didn't accept it. We went from camp after camp, from DP camp to DP camp. As Elaine has explained, and we're looking for people who will survive. We didn't find anybody. My father remembered that he had a brother in Canada, and he remembered his number, his address. He remembered his address. He wrote it out in a letter, and he sent a letter to my uncle in Toronto, addressed to David Leipciger, Toronto, Beatrice Street. That's it. Didn't remember the number. And it was delivered. And he made the papers. It took 3 years because Canada had a quota, as did the United States. And finally in 48, they opened up the gates. And that's when Elaine was talking about when I had 2 friends. You see, the people who survived were much older than us. We were, at that point, we were 17 years old. There was no one else that was at least not 5 years older than us. So the 3 of us were together. We had no other friends. And we, you know, were trying to do something with ourselves. My friend and I, we took German lessons. We took lessons in mathematics. And trying to get some kind of education, because the last time I went to school was in grade 4. I was now 17 and I had no education. 3 years later, I came to Canada. I still didn't have any education. I had the chutzpah to go to the collegiate, to the high school, and tell the guy that I want to be admitted to the high school. And I told him I was 18, even so I was 20, and he accepted me. And I went to grade 11 and grade 12 and grade 13. At that time we had 13 grades of high school, 13 grades of schooling. And I did it in 2 years, and then I went on, and I went to university. I became an engineer, lots of tsuras, and then I became the happiest man in the world. I met my beautiful wife, and life started again. My father was alive. We had grandchildren. He had grandchildren, and I had children. And, you know, life was bittersweet, but it was the juxtaposition of what past we had to where we were finding ourselves in 1950, 1960 in Canada, free people. You know, we married in 1955. In 1956, Bernice and I, we came to Miami. Wonderful. Life was wonderful. And it has continued to be wonderful because we have 3 daughters. Unfortunately, one of our daughters died of cancer about 3 years ago. But she left us 3 wonderful grandchildren and a wonderful husband who is a member of our family. And now I have 9 grandchildren, or we have 9 grandchildren. And we have 8 great-grandchildren and 2 on the way. Life is sweet. And you know, I'm going on March of Living again, my 20th time. To educate our young people is what I told you. The most precious, our most precious thing that we have is our children. And we have to educate them, and we have to equip them to fight the struggle which they're going to face in their life. So with this, my dear friend, I thank you for coming here, for listening. I hope that you go and you inspire your grandchildren to go on a March of the Living or do something and remain to be Jews. And the most important thing is to be proud Jews. And if somebody says, you know, you don't have any way to be a Jew here, they have to fight back. They cannot give in to the bully. They have to stand up to the bully. And that, unfortunately, is the way that we have to go forward. Fighting for ourselves because we have the right to be who we are. Thank you.
Will you take a few questions?
Yes.
Okay.